Hello everyone and welcome back to Arsenal Pass for this deck tech video with a special guest. We are talking Rhinar today, but don't worry, we are talking with someone who's actually won something with Rhinar. I've got Chandler Toe with me, calling San Jose winner. Chandler, first of all, big congratulations on your win over the weekend and welcome on to Arsenal Pass.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries, excited to have you on. We actually got to meet in Jersey for the first time and then we played at Worlds. And then we also got to catch up on Sunday night and have a bit of a chat about your run. But just first of all, for those that haven't met you like I have, maybe just give a quick introduction to yourself. How long have you been playing Flesh and Blood, and what's your affinity for Rhinar?
So for the people that don't know me, my name's Chandler Toe. I've been playing Flesh and Blood for about a year now, right about when Tales of Arya dropped. And yeah, I ended up just being a Rhinar one trick because, he's not a super popular hero, so I didn't have too many living legend points when I started. And I just like rolling dice. What can I say?
Yep. Well, I even to the point that if you saw Chandler on coverage at all, he's got his like cup for rolling his dice and to make sure there's no questions about when those sixes come up. But so Chandler, have you played just Rhinar throughout your time as a Flesh and Blood player? Have you dabbled in any other constructed decks?
Yeah, I think I've dabbled a little bit just because I kind of like to have additional decks to lend out to people and play test against. But in terms of competitive events, I've only been playing Rhinar.
And whereabouts are you from, Chandler? And who are the kind of the people that you do test with? Who are the people you're working with for the World Championships and for the San Jose weekend?
So I'm based in Kansas City. In terms of playtesting, I don't really have a team or anything. It's mainly just playing with my locals, and that's about it. Not really a fan of Talishar, at least.
Yep, no, I understand. And tell us a bit about the event. So obviously, we played in the World Championships. You were involved in the World Championships, but decided, I think you were X3, but decided to still drop and play the calling, which ended up being, a bit of a masterstroke on your side. Why don't you tell us a bit about your weekend and why you decided to, ultimately go and play the calling rather than continue on with Worlds?
Yeah, so I ended up 5-3 for World's Day 1, going 3-0 in draft and 2-3 in CC. And I was kind of just unsatisfied with my CC performance. Felt like I didn't play very well. On top of just not really wanting to play Blitz on day 2 and in the Battle Harden as well. I kind of just made it my goal to play CC in the calling and hopefully day 2.
Yep, which of course ultimately, spoiler alert, we know you did more than day two. But maybe tell us a bit about your run at the calling. Like, what were the kind of matchups you played into, and what did it feel like to sort of make that run into top 8?
Yeah, so I finished day 1 7-1 with my one loss being to Jeremiah of all decks. And then day 2 I went 3-2 in the Swiss rounds, losing to Briar and Phi, and barely bubbled to be 8th place. And that last run ended up being with Briar, Lexi, and Bravo.
Yep, and I heard you kind of in the top 8, especially in your quarterfinals match, you just kind of tore through it as well. I know you're playing. I think you were playing Matt Coles on Briar in the first round of top 8.
Yeah, the Wolf Pack, right?
Yeah. That's not the reason we have you on, just because you beat the Wolfpack, by the way. But I wanted to ask you a bit about the kind of like your ethos of Rhinar. A lot of people have different views, including myself, about like how you should play Rhinar, why you should play Rhinar. Is it a deck just to high roll Blood Rush Bellows? Is it a deck to take advantage of the Intimidate mechanic? Is it a deck you ultimately just have to saddle yourself with being a little bit below rate on things, but have to against the aggro decks get lucky? Like, what's your kind of like overall ethos on playing Rhinar? Like, what do you want to do with a deck like this?
So I think everyone can agree that Blood Rush Bellows and Manbull Claws is kind of the strongest thing that you can do in Rhinar. So the deck is just really focused on that, and also just kind of having efficient 2-card hands where you block 2 and swing for 6, 7, or 8. I feel like the notable cards that aren't included are like Alpha Rampage, Barraging Beatdown. Just the Intimidate mechanic not being so great in a 40 life format makes me not really want to run cards like that.
Yeah, so your deck is revolved around a lot more of like the numbers rather than the Intimidate mechanic. But not that you don't have access to it. Obviously, it's printed on your hero, and you do have ways to provide that evasion. But your kind of general train of thought on Rhinar, especially in this meta, is to just be have bigger numbers and be more aggressive. Cool. Well, We might jump straight into the deck and have a look at this list. We're going to break it down by your main deck and your sideboard and talk about some of the card choices you made and how this deck comes together. All right, Chandler, we've got the main deck, your main Core 60 laid out here in front of us for everyone to see. First of all, just wanted to ask you, you operate sort of on a philosophy of, a main Core 60 cards, and then you have your sideboard that you have access to. Maybe you could talk us through, like, why these 60 cards? Like, what is the overall? You talked a little bit about the top of the show about, what you're doing with Rhinar, but how do these 60 cards in particular help you do that? What are they doing together?
Yeah, so the core game plan of these 60 cards is kind of just to facilitate good Blood Rush Bellow turns. And generally, that kind of just means having a good 2-cost attack in Arsenal. So swing big, obviously, even smash with Big Tree. And then playing out that Blood Rush Bellow will generally allow you to swing both claws and that big attack.
Yeah. I wanted to actually ask you a little bit about Smash the Big Tree. It's a card that we don't see in a lot of lists, and you're running 3 here. Is that effectively what you say? Is it access to almost swing bigs sort of 4 through 6, or is there some other reason for having that card in the list?
Yeah. So it's basically just very consistent damage, right? It's really nice having that break point of 7, and even on a 2-cost body.
Yeah.
I guess an interesting question is some people might ask why I'm not running something like Bare Fangs. But I find that the cards that cause you to draw and discard a random card kind of make you sacrifice agency, whether that's randomly discarding a Blood Rush Bellow or just making it difficult for you to pick what you want to arsenal. So it's just very nice having a card that gives you that flat 7.
Yeah, so I guess what some people might say, right, is but you lose the potential 1 extra damage and the intimidate. But from your side, the way you're looking to play the game, the intimidate isn't as relevant, right?
hmm
Yeah. So in the core of your deck, let's kind of go through it, and we'll talk more about some of these cards. But as you say, it's really designed around Blood Rush Bellows turns and Mandible Claws being your main choice of weapon. But we'll talk about club in your sideboard. So in the main deck here, I can see you've got, 12, 15, you've got 18 blues in your main deck. I know a lot of people have fluctuated around 15, 18. 18 seems to be the new kind of standard amount of blues for Rhino. Would you say that's kind of true?
Yeah, so I think looking at other popular lists like the Canadian Nationals list, as well as the other list that top aided the calling, 18 blues is kind of at least the minimum you should be running for claws.
Yeah. Oh, so you're actually
And I
21, aren't
actually,
you? Sorry, you're at 21 with the pack hunts.
yeah.
So what when you say minimum number for claws, why is 18? But obviously you're at 21. Why is that such a good number for claws?
Yeah, so on an optimal claws turn, you want 7 resources total, with that being 1 for the Blood Rush Bellow, 2 for a claw, 2 for another claw, and 2 for your final attack. So blues are just really important towards hitting that 7. And especially if you have 2 blues, then your tunic resource can get you to that 7th resource and make it much more efficient.
Right, so you can even play your Blood Rush Bellows off a 3-card hand, for instance, plus your 1 card in arsenal. Because you see, I think it's a great point, right? You see 2 cards off the top of your deck. You're going to see, apart from your arsenal card, you have 6 cards to potentially play with there. One of those going to your Blood Rush Bellow, 1 for the Blood Rush Bellow itself, 1 is the first card that you pitch. So yeah, I mean, makes sense. So 21 blues, you feel, gives you that opportunity to at least see those 2 blues, if not, the yellow or the red you pitch afterwards for your extra resource.
Yeah, and especially with an ice meta, it just always feels good to have extra blues.
Right. Maybe you could talk a bit about some of these blues, because there's some choices that we don't see from a lot of other players. So I wanted to ask you about Predatory Assault in particular. Like, why that blue over some things like, we see people play Savage Feast, for instance, or some of these other particular blues like High Roller and Clearing Bellows, which you don't play.
Yeah, so since our list doesn't have Brooding Beatdowns and Alpha Rampage, the redundancy of those additional intimidates isn't really needed and doesn't really support the game plan very well. It's kind of nice having some extra blues, especially 2 costs, just so that if you need to, you can play them for a Blood Rush Bellow turn and get that complete +6 from Blood Rush Bellow. There's a lot of flexibility when it comes to these blues, and I've run other things like Sift and Whispers of the Oracle in the past. But these are kind of just really nice for grindy matchups like Oldham.
Yeah, it makes sense. So, it's your potential finisher on that Blood Rush Bellows turn, like you say. What about a card like This Round's on Me? Again, not something we've seen that in this meta, but not necessarily out of Rhinar. So what's the kind of deal with that card in your list?
Yeah, so obviously a tech card for Ninja, which is a pretty rough matchup for Rhinar. It is nice that you can pitch a blue to pay for it and swing the club, potentially arsenaling the card that you drew, or just play it with your Tunic resource and arsenal that card you drew. I will say it's not super important just because a lot of our blues are very situational, and if you swap it for something else, it's not a huge deal.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, though, they're all blue. They all block 3, and apart from your reckless swing, obviously, which is doing another job. Let's talk a little bit about some of the yellows. A pretty standard yellow list here, but there's a couple in particular I wanted to ask you about. We see pummels dropping in and out of Rhinar lists. Pummel's something to me in the past I haven't used a lot of, but maybe you could tell us why you think pummel is so important, and particularly why yellow pummel.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, back when I played in the calling jersey, I actually ran 9 pummels. So this deck started being very centered around pummel. Um, the numbers dropped recently, but I still think it's a very strong inclusion for Rhinar, just because obviously using your Tunic resource to play your pummel off a 2-card attack is very strong. We see in Olden do it with CNC all the time. And then it's also kind of just good with scab skins in the sense that, if you have 2 blues to pitch and that 2-cost attack and pummel, then you could also potentially swing your weapon as well. And you can even use scab skins as a sort of bluffing mechanic in the sense that, you roll a 2 or 3, your opponent probably isn't expecting you to pummel.
Yeah, it feels like it's less obvious than what we see out of decks like Ultim. The pummel is a bit harder to read. What about Pack Call? That's a card people, some people love, some people hate it. The kind of, I guess, the argument against it is, it puts your Blood Rush Bellows to the bottom. What's your kind of view on Pack Call as a card you include?
Yeah, so originally when this card came out, I actually chose not to run it because, as you said, it puts Blood Rush Bellow, your win condition, to the bottom of the deck. Recently, though, I actually have a really high opinion on it just because it's an attack that blocks for 3, but you can also have a potential upside when you block, which kind of breaks the curve of what cards can do. So this synergizes with things like Crown of Providence, Sink Below, That All You Got, and Enlightened Strike. Anything that lets you draw a card. Knowing what card is on top of your deck can be really strong.
Yep. And I think, a lot of the reds we can kind of just go over as a bunch here because, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of these cards like Enlightened Strike, Red, Smash Instinct, the swing with Big Tree that we talked about, these are ways to present good 2-card hands outside of your Blood Rush Bellows turns. Is that kind of what, if I hit the nail on the head there?
Yeah, exactly. So if you don't have Blood Rush Bellow, generally our plan is kind of just block 2 cards, come in with 7. We don't have the Intimidates to end games, right? But if you end up having a life lead, just continuously coming in for 7 can get them to reckless swing range.
Yeah. So I'd love to talk a bit about, we're going to go have a look at the sideboard in a second, Chandler, but let's talk a little bit about some of the matchups. Let's talk a bit about something like Ultim. Does this deck struggle more into Ultim without the Intimidate mechanic access to, or, is just kind of the value efficiency and your ability to Blood Rush Bellows and pummel enough to push through damage there?
Yeah, so I think it looks like it's not very favored against Oldham, but over my experience with US Nats and with the World Championship, I actually feel it's a pretty favored matchup just because you have that solid math and you have Blood Rush Bellows to have those unfair turns.
Yep. And what about, I guess, the last sort of, I guess maybe it looks like your 58th, 59th, 60th card in the deck is Sink Below. Are these kind of, they're in for most matchups because, they're a card that gets chopped and changed sometimes, or what does that look like?
Yeah, it's just a really good, consistent card. It kind of just helps lower variance a bit. You draw an all red hand, or maybe you draw a bunch of blues. Just being able to put a card on the bottom is pretty good.
Yeah, dig for that Blood Rush Bellows. Cool. All right, Chandler. Well, I'd love to talk a bit about the sideboard as well, so let's flick over and have a look at that. All right, Chandler, first thing I want to ask about is just the equipment suite in your sideboard here. So you have access to Romping Club, as an additional weapon. When are you playing the Romping Club as opposed to the Mandible Claws, and sort of why?
Yeah, so I find it can be kind of difficult to, have that 1 card in arsenal, 3-card hand for the Blood Rush Bellow turns against decks that present continuous on hits. So I'm thinking of Mask of Momentum, Dawnblade, uh, even Lexi. Those decks are kind of just presenting something that you really want to block almost every turn.
And then of course you've got access to Null Gloves and Scalehorn for your wizards, I assume.
Yep, and Viscera as well for the Northern Gloves.
And then what about the Skull Crushers? When are you playing the Skull Crushers over the Gambler's Gloves?
Yeah, so the idea behind Skull Crushers is that Gambler's Gloves gets worse the less you're rolling, just because you're less likely to actually use them. So in all those club matchups where I'm already on the defense, that one armor is really good, and I'm likely not going to roll too much. And it can also kind of just be a way to cheat in value. So I also use it against Briar just because it blocks those on hits and maybe it gets me some free damage.
Yeah, they take the turn off to maybe set up the Channel Heroic, or they have that awkward all non-attack action hand. Then all of a sudden, you're like, all right, well, here's my chance to push some damage, hit the Scabskin Leathers, roll a 5, get 2 action points, and all of a sudden, you could have a crazy Blood Rush Bellows turn or something with the Skull Crushers adding that extra value. What about the one card that's really piqued my interest is Rolling Thunder? Like, when are you playing Rolling Thunder, and why is that a card that you like to have in the sideboard?
Yeah, so I started including it after seeing the Canadian Nats list with Sigil of Solace. With that card being good just because it's very flexible, right? It doesn't use your action point, it costs 0. So I kind of wanted a more offensive version of that I can also use against control matchups. So Rolling Thunder pairs very nicely with your 2-cost brute attacks since you pitch your blue to pay for both of them. And it's also really good in club matchups just because it works well with the club and has very good math. Rolling a 1 is pretty bad, but if you roll a 2 or 3, you're doing 6 or 7 damage, which is pretty good. Rolling a 4, you're doing a Wounded Bowl, which everyone knows is pretty good. And then if you roll a 5 or a 6, you also get the Skull Crushers bonus. So you're dealing 10 or 11 damage off 2 cards, which is obviously cheating good value in.
I love 2-card Glacial Footsteps. Don't we all, right? So I like that, actually. I hadn't thought about that as much as that with club. Lastly, just want to talk about maybe the Remembrance. Is this for matchups like Ultim, for these grindy matchups?
Yeah. So always for Oldhim at least. There's a couple other matchups I might run it in. Just because your deck is very centered around Blood Rush Bellows, right? So there will be times when you play a Blood Rush Bellow and you can't do the full combo. You only do maybe 10 damage with 2 claws, for instance. So kind of just having that remembrance so that, you play all 3 Blood Rushes, well, now you can get them back.
Yep, now you have 6 Blood Rush Bellows. Defense reactions, are these sort of coming in? I'm guessing the Fate for Scenes, maybe they're coming against Guardians as well. That are your gots for your ninjas and for your Rosetta Thorn Offenders.
Yeah. So Favor Scene just feels good against Bravo, right? Because you want Arsenal and stop those dominated effects. And also just helps against Oldhim for, the Winter's Wail Frostbite and hitting your second cycle a little bit quicker.
Yep, of course.
That all you got feels really strong against Ninja and Runeblade, of course. And pairs very nicely with Enlightened Strike, just because it doesn't matter what card you draw off that, you can play the E-Strike for 7.
True, E-Strike in hand, block out with your whole hand and still be able to E-Strike for 7 for that 2-card value. Chandler, I got to say, like, looking at your list when I pulled it up, I was like, oh, so interesting, this card. But your list is so very well thought out, and, obviously you have like these really strong game plans you want to enact, so, not surprised that you were able to take out the Calling Hands of San Jose. I want to say, again, a massive congratulations. Before we sort of wrap up this deck tech, though, Dynasty is dropping, this past weekend. By the time this video comes out, I want to pick your brain a little bit, and I'm sure some of the Arsenal Pass viewers and listeners would love to hear about it, about cards that you're looking at. Before that, I do want to say Chandler's been kind enough to do up a full sideboard guide to the deck that he played at this event for Arsenal Pass patrons, so that's up on our Patreon now. You can go check that out, full sideboard guide. Chandler's very detailed with his matchups, which is great. Cards that come in, come out. Dynasty, Chandler, what are the cards that you are looking at to sort of plug into this style of build? Or are you thinking like you're going to take Rhinar in a completely different direction after this?
Yeah, so pretty much all of the cards spoiled in Dynasty are kind of in a different direction of this deck, right? They're really focused around discarding. So, well, unfortunately, I probably won't run most of these cards. I at least will run Skullcrack, the 2 for 6 that gives you a resource when discarded, just because it'll help facilitate those Blood Rush Bellow turns.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going a lot deeper on these cards. The 3 for 12, as I call it, although it costs you quite a few cards. things like that. I'm excited about. So look, I'm excited to see where you kind of go with Rhino next. Before we close it out, if people want to, ask you questions or interact with you, I think you're a bit avid in the Discord. Is that right? The community Rhino Discord.
Yeah. Not really on much social media, but I like to talk a lot in the Rhinar channel on the Discord. So feel free to hit me up there.
There you go. You can find Chandler there. And yeah, just want to say a big thank you for coming on, Chandler. And I'm sure we'll see you at events in North America next year. And congrats again on the big one.
Thank you.